Welcome to The Growth Project, a podcast brought to you by AMPLOS. I am Dr. Milt Lowder, joined by Dr. Drew Brannon.
Checking in.
And just want to remind you, if this is your first time listening, one, thank you for joining. We are a performance psychology practice headquartered in Greenville, South Carolina. And this podcast is brought about to help you grow, to help invest in you, to help you be better, help you pursue better. We get excited about optimizing who people are and what they do. And this podcast is another way for us to share ideas, experiences, education, background, to really help you become who you want to be and the leader you need to be.
Yeah, right on. So today we're talking about a topic that is not a new one in general for the podcast. That's culture. We've talked a lot about culture in previous episodes. And I think that's mainly because, I don't know anyone who doesn't want to have a great culture. Nobody wakes up and thinks, gosh, if we could just get to the point where we were like mediocre or maybe worse than mediocre when it came to culture, we'd really be in it, right? And we'd really be in business. So of course, no one wants to have a bad culture.
Yeah. So what we normally hear is, I want to be a part of a great team. I want this to be a good place to work. And that's what people think about when they think about culture. But what they don't do is spend any time thinking about, well, what helps create it? What takes away from it? You know, there's a good idea, but not an effort or focus on how to build it. Everybody wants it, as you said. They don't want to say, well, I want to be on a team that's just average.
Yep.
Or I want to go to work and hate it. They spend a lot of time dreaming about it, but they don't really think about it, what adds to it and what takes away from it.
Yeah. It's funny, as we're talking about this, I think about this phrase that I heard recently. It was a guy who was talking about he'd had a big, let's just say he had a big win in business. A big account had come in, and I asked him, well, how'd you pull it off? Like, what happened, you know? And he basically said, it fell in my lap. He's like, look, it doesn't work that way very often. You know, it's not by no means is that kind of like his MO or his plan of attack when it came to how he was running his business, but he had a big account just fall in his lap. And the reason I'm using that phrase is because that never happens when it comes to culture.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to meet someone who has a great culture. And how did you get there? The answer isn't it fell in my lap, to your point of people that are enjoying and benefiting from having a tremendous team culture have worked hard to get it.
Yeah. And understanding, and we spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about, how do you build a high performance culture? How do you build a high-performance team? One of the things you always like to say, Drew, is it's not for everybody. And it doesn't just happen. And so this podcast today is not so much how do you build that culture, but what gets in the way? And more importantly, who gets in the way? What kind of personality, what kind of behaviors can really kill the culture that you've worked hard to establish?
Yeah, and I think before we even jump into the specifics on that of where we're headed, just some fundamental foundational statements to make, beginning with, there are no perfect people.
Yeah.
So before we start talking about some of these problematic ways of being and personalities, I think it's important to acknowledge that nobody out there is perfect. And there's no team member who's checking every box, doing everything right. There is no leader who's checking every box and doing everything right. So we want to just put from the very beginning,
us included.
Yeah.
At the top of the list.
Just clarify that there are no perfect people. And so that is not the goal.
Yeah, the goal is not to be judgmental or to shame anyone or to call out people. It's really, what are the behaviors that these people tend to exhibit? And for whatever reason, we see a lot of different people go through a lot of different things, whether it's stress, whether it's pressure, whether it's a traumatic event, whether in the wrong job environment, whether they've lost interest, just life happens.
Right.
But for whatever reason, this kind of person shows up at work with this kind of attitude, this kind of mindset, and these kind of behaviors that really is taken away from their culture. The really interesting part, and we see it across every domain in which we work, sometimes these people can be great performers.
Yeah, that's very true. Very, very true. Which, man, when you have those folks on your team who do something really well, like whatever that is, and like let's say they have a special and unique skill set or talent that you already know would be extremely difficult to replace, it's amazing how many passes we will give those people.
Yes.
And what we'll put up with.
And then that ends up setting the standard and the bar for everyone else. And so it's hard to not play favorites.
Oh, yeah.
And in whatever line of work you're in. And so if culture is really the most important ingredient to high performance, then how are you holding everyone accountable to the standard?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, I was hoping you were going to answer that one.
I think I'll just talk about something different. So let's get into this though, in that here's the balancing act, right? And that's what we're doing in this conversation today. On the one hand, as we said a second ago, there are no perfect people. On the other hand, what we're getting into now is we want to go through a list of these types of folks can be major problems, if we're being honest, if they're on your team. These things, these behaviors can have a ripple effect that works throughout your culture that has a major negative implication.
Yeah, and back to that no perfect people, like every description we're getting ready to go through, we all experience at some point in time.
Yeah, we've all done these things.
And so what we're talking about is consistent behavior over time without any effort, without any awareness, without any understanding or appreciation of their struggles or how it might impact others. That's who we're really talking about here.
Yeah. So I'm glad you said that. We do have that assumption as we're talking about these folks is you have tried to coach these things, and despite your best effort, we have not seen much progress.
Yeah.
We've not seen much change. And if that's the case, and we'll get into that throughout the conversation, it could mean, doesn't automatically mean, but it could mean that both this person and your team needs a new scenario.
We just always talk about disruptions. And so there has to be some significant disruption for behavior change to take place.
Yep.
And it starts with an awareness. And so we would hope as you're listening to this, just be mindful, be open. Where does this show up on your team? Who might be exhibiting these behaviors? It could be you. You could be in a bad spot. And then think about what is a disruption. It's an easy answer to say, well, just get rid of them. And that may be the cause, that may be the solution. But really kind of think through, what are we doing to try to create change, and how are we holding people accountable? But it first begins with an awareness. So what's an example, Drew, of someone who may kill the culture? What do we see?
Yeah, and I think that's the right language, and it might sound kind of extreme, it might kind of harsh, but that's really what we're saying is these are the types of behaviors and people that can kill your culture and will kill your culture over time. So the first one is when things get hard, not if, because we know they will get hard. When things get hard, these people complain. So like something's not working, something's not going well, the business isn't going well, whatever it might be, something is hard and they complain. How does that affect the team?
To me, I think it's very demotivating. We got to face the brutal truth to be able to say, hey, this is really difficult, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about someone who has a tendency to whine or complain about the process of how difficult it is, of how hard it is, of how it, and extreme words is what I pay attention to.
Yeah.
So in terms of complaining, this always happens, or we never get over the hump, or we're always having to face this issue, or that person always does this. Those extreme words leave you really little room for growth.
Yeah.
And it's such a demotivating process that you know what to expect from that person. So how it affects a team is if I know that person has a tendency to complain about something hard, what you may be doing is you may avoid taking difficult things to them. You may shield them from what the real challenge is. And as a leader, you're going to carry that burden yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think about what it's like to be a part of this. So, okay, it's hard. Something's going on. It's difficult, which means for me as a team member, my stress is high. My emotions are probably volatile. My outlook might be one that's kind of negative at this point. There's all these things going on inside of me. What do I not need? Is someone making it worse. What's the last thing we need given our circumstance? And that is the person who is making this worse. Like I'm already the snowball rolling down the hill. You are adding momentum to what's happening to me. Right. And so how does that come across? Is it's frustrating, it's irritating, it's going to create tension and conflict. Now we've created new issues. And that's really one of the biggest parts of this, I think, is there are already a whole host of issues, many of which we probably can't control and we didn't cause. And now we have these additional things popping up because we have this person on our team. Yeah. We're creating our own complications.
And that person on the team is so worried about them. We talk about stress makes you selfish. And so when it's difficult, when it's hard, they're so worried about them. And this is a really lonely spot for a leader. As you said, what they need is encouragement. What they need is a little bit of hope. What they need is a little bit of confidence. They don't need you adding to the problem.
Right.
And because now if I'm the leader and I got to now worry about you, and then I got to worry about how to solve the problem, then there's so much wasted energy and effort about things that are outside of our control.
I can't focus on the real problem.
Yes.
Because I got to deal with these issues, this drama that has suddenly showed up on my team.
So why that kills a culture, we aren't focused on solving problems. We're focused on the burden of the situation. And so we aren't coming together to fight a problem and solve a problem. It's just coming together to complain.
Right.
And misery loves company. And now you get a group of people and the culture is really affected because it's hard to have great chemistry and connection if all you do is complain.
Yeah. And so the bottom line on this one is these are people who lack grit. They're not resilient. And when it gets difficult, they're looking for someone or something to just push the responsibility to. Yeah. Unfortunately. Okay. So let's go to this next one here. What about people that they kind of need their own personal coach? And here's what I mean by that is when no one's watching, their effort bottoms out. Like they turn in a whole different kind of performance when no one is looking over their shoulder. Talk us through that. How does that happen? And what do people's reaction to that tend to be?
Yeah, to me, this is the first thing that you think about. The leader walks in, all of a sudden they get really busy.
Yeah.
Or they've created a list of things, or they're going to jump in and take ownership for somebody else's work. But they aren't really putting in the time or the effort and energy. They're gonna come in late. They're gonna leave early. They aren't really productive in between. They're looking for breaks. Deadlines don't matter. They aren't willing to do whatever it takes. They got a set schedule, and they're going to sit to that schedule, and they're going to avoid pushing the gas. They're going to avoid putting forth everything they have. And for whatever reason, it kind of becomes that least common denominator who's dragging everyone down, that other people start compensating. How it affects the culture, other people are compensating for their work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're just not being professionals. Yeah. They're not being adults.
Yeah, there's no contribution.
If the only thing that keeps you on the path is someone paying attention to what you're doing, we're all in big trouble here.
Now, we need accountability, but in those gaps of accountability, that's the part that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. If maybe I should not reveal this, but one of our former admins used to say that her best day at work was when nobody was here. Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
And not that this was necessarily her mindset, but to me, it's like, whew, I can breathe. I can rest easy. I can take care of the stuff I need to take care of. I can run my errands. I can go take a long lunch.
I don't know what was going on. I wasn't here.
but I think that's a good example. And so what that creates is doubt. And like, hey, can I trust this person to do their job? Or if I got to be there to make sure they're getting it done.
Yeah. And I just don't think any team can thrive at the highest level if everybody needs some form of a babysitter.
Yeah.
I mean, and that might sound kind of harsh, but I think great teams, high performing teams, of course there's many elements to it of how you achieve that. But one of them is you have so many people, a critical mass of people with such intrinsically motivated tendencies. So that'd be the opposite of this. Like a person who's intrinsically motivated doesn't care who's paying attention because they're going to do it anyways. These are people who are very extrinsically motivated folks, which is why their effort's dropping off.
Yeah, why it kills a culture is what makes a great culture is people are willing to sacrifice themselves to be a part of something greater. And this person that we're describing isn't willing to sacrifice anything to be a part, to build a part or be a part of something greater. And so it becomes a very individualized focus and people are working around them.
Well, they are willing to sacrifice their effort, though.
Yeah, they are going to sacrifice. Yeah,
they're good with that.
They are going to sacrifice their effort in that process. So we got two so far. When it gets hard, they complain. No one's watching. The effort drops off. This is another one when there is lack of a certain path, when there's uncertainty, a disruption in the market, a disruption in the sales cycle, we lost our best customer, you lose an employee, this person immediately goes to worst case scenario. They assume the worst. Their lens is always, it's never going to work out, or they ask this question from a position of weakness and fear and anxiety.
Yep.
How does that affect a culture?
Yeah, so let's just do an example. Let's do a hypothetical on that I think makes a lot of sense. So imagine the scenario, there's a team meeting taking place. And that is the day where some of the leadership in the room are going to tell the whole team that, guess what? Our biggest client, or one of our biggest clients, has decided to go another direction. Like the big whale is no longer going to be in the boat, for lack of a better term. And as they're getting ready to communicate this to the team, we've talked on previous podcasts about and people are familiar with kind of the general rule of thirds of how things might break down in the room. So the information is shared, and immediately, let's say it breaks down in the rule of thirds, meaning a third of that room are like, hey, we're going to be okay. Like we trust ourselves and we trust our process and we're going to figure this out. The other third, the other end of the continuum there, they're freaking out.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, that's who we're talking about right now, of like, this is terrible, doom and gloom. How will we make it? Whatever other conclusions you want to draw. Well, guess what? Our middle third are the ones who can be influenced. And so I think back to your question of, well, what effect do they have on a team? That middle third gets really, really tense and stressed and nervous and worried, and is more likely to come along with these folks in a situation like that.
Because they were making the loudest noise.
Yes, exactly. The squeaky wheel in that room is the person who is assuming the worst.
Yeah. And we're tapping into that fear of everyone else and exaggerating that response.
And so all those people that were in the middle and able to be influenced are now becoming the dwellers of the negativity along with these folks. And so they are literally like pulling people with them, back to your point of how misery loves company.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when I think, why is that so difficult to a culture, and why does that kill a culture? Well, think about if your culture, one of our core values used to be resilience. Mm-hmm. One of our core values now is hustle. One of our core values is growth. Well, these are opportunities for growth, and all these behaviors are inconsistent with it.
Right.
And so if you spend a lot of time and effort and energy to build that, and then the first chance you get to show up and demonstrate it, and there's no grit, there's no resilience, and you're just complaining and thinking about the worst case scenario, that's the opposite of a growth mindset.
Yeah. It just gets exhausting too. Because I think what happens is the people in the room who are more resilient and have grit and are willing to kind of like see potential and possibilities, as soon as the negative narrative begins to get out there, they just grow tired of these folks. They just grow tired of them.
And not only like your scenario is like, we aren't saying you don't get permission to be human and say, man, this is bad. But that worst case, we're going to have to shut down the business. But you can see this, and we see this on a daily basis.
Right.
Anytime there's a meeting called, anytime we have a conversation, anytime we're having a compensation meeting, anytime we're going to develop new business, this person is like, well, why are we going after them? Or why are we doing this strategy? And anytime a company tries to do something different, this kind of person, I believe, is pretty negative about it.
Yeah.
They're like, well, it's never going to work out. We've tried that before, and it just stifles growth. It stifles energy. It stifles innovation, and really creates a sense of, hey, we're just going to kind of keep doing the same because this person right here cannot handle risk.
And these are the people too that are most likely to, like, when the meeting's over, these are the folks who are going to like side text other folks. They're going to do the water cooler conversations if those still happen. Do people still have water coolers?
We have something similar.
We have a water machine back there. I don't think there's a whole lot of gatherings.
No, there's not. I don't. Well, when hustle is a core value, you don't get a whole lot of time to gather.
A lot of water machine.
Yeah, and so maybe that goes into that piece. So one of the other things we have on here, if we could transition to that one as well, is when the gossip begins, they are quick to jump right in.
Oh man.
Or what made me think about it, Drew, they're starting the gossip.
Yeah, it could be. What was the Dave Ramsey school of thought on that, on gossip?
I don't remember that. It was one of his books.
It was something like, I think he said that there were two things that would get you fired around here. one was lying, and I think the other one was like going along or participating with gossip, like not standing up for the mission or something like that, whatever it was. So I think for these folks, what we're saying is, and look, we realize that some workplaces are big, some are small, some are like, but here's one common thing that's going to happen in every workplace. There's going to be some gossip. There's going to be some form of somebody saying something, putting that ball in motion, even if it's kind of on the line. And I think you're probably more likely to have on the line type comments than like the gross exaggeration gossip. But they put that ball in motion, and it's kind of straddling the line of like, is this okay or is this not okay? Is it gossip or is it not? And these folks love it. Like they're all in. They're going to jump right in and participate in the discussion. They might even move the ball off the line and cross the line. And now this is clearly gossip. And these are really costly folks.
Yeah. And so what happens if we think the number one characteristic of a high performing team is psychological safety, or the ability to trust others? Well, gossip erodes that. That's number one culture killer, I believe, in terms of building trust. If I'm gossiping about you or gossiping to you about somebody else, you're thinking, well, what is he saying behind my back?
Should be, unless you're just foolish.
Yeah, and how are they undermining what I'm doing? And so now there's uncertainty, there's a lack of trust, there's a lack of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody kind of goes into protection mode. And so we don't have a great team because I'm not quite sure if I can show my authentic self. I can bring any ideas because I'm going to be judged or criticized or ridiculed or talked about behind my back.
Yeah. Yeah, this can get really, really tricky and problematic. And there tends to be people who are just, for whatever reason, like they're okay with jumping into these conversations. Okay, let's go to this next one here, because I know I have seen this, and we're not really talking about sports. This is kind of an easy sports one to talk about, and you've seen this as well.
Oh yeah,
plenty. But like what about when the team wins? So in a sports environment, the team wins. It's like we won the game. In a business or corporate environment, I think it could be we had a great month, we had a great quarter, we had a great year, whatever it is. So the team is winning, but the individual hasn't had such a very good performance. Maybe they had a bad game, they had a bad month. And so guess what? They're pouting.
Yeah.
Like, we won, but I didn't do great, so I'm going to pout.
And or conversely, like, we'll just go ahead and throw this other characteristic. We lost. But
I had a good game.
But I had a great game.
I did my thing.
You know, I got this flashback to church basketball growing up, and win or lose, we had a guy on our team. The first thing he would do is run over the scorebook to see how many points he scored. And so, like, whether we won or when he celebrate with the team, if we lost, everybody's discouraged. He's like, did he get his?
Man,
did he get his? And so that plays out in we've seen it everywhere.
Oh yeah,
you know, we hit our number, we hit our goal, and I didn't do it. And so I'm so in my own head. I'm so worried about me that I'm pouting, I'm whining, I'm making excuses. I'm not able to celebrate other success. And how much do we see this? Like the A players, you know, the salespeople, they hit their number. They aren't worried about anybody else.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
They aren't worried about anybody else. They're like, hey, I just got to get mine. And I've had players on teams say the best thing I can do for our team is go perform. If they don't perform, that's on them. Like, here's what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
But that in a culture,
that's
a group of individuals trying to play their own game.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and let's be sure that we give room for, let's try to nuance this a little bit. Is there a place where you can land in which the team won? Okay, great, team won. You celebrate with and for the team, and yet there's something inside of you that's unsettled because you know you didn't do what you're capable of doing? Absolutely. Like, can that happen? For sure. The key point here is you're not pouting. You're still celebrating with and for the team, and you want to do better both for you and for them. Like, that's a completely acceptable landing spot. That's not the person we're talking about right here.
Yeah, I think that's the key piece. Why are you so upset?
Yeah,
because you did not play well enough to help the team, or you didn't play well enough because of your pride or your ego.
Yeah. Is it because you look bad or because you didn't contribute? And I think that gives you a big picture of whether you're a team player or not. Mm-hmm.
And if you're a leader, the reason for their behavior behind all of this, what's underlying all of this. That's where you got to put your finger on the piece and say, okay, well, what's really driving this behavior?
Yeah.
Is this person upset because they didn't get to contribute? Or is this person upset because they look bad?
But gosh, if you are a leader hearing this conversation and you have someone on your team whose emotions fluctuate based upon his or her individual performance, independent of what the team is doing, like that's something you need to pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully you're paying attention to all of these, but that is really one that says maybe my team is not as strong as I think.
Yeah.
And we only, we can kind of be old men here and say, like, I think we're only emphasizing the individual more, at least in America. We're only emphasizing that in sports. We're only emphasizing it in business. We're forgetting that, as John Wood said, the strength of the team is a team. And that's what we really want to be a part of.
All right, so those we've established this one. Like, look out for those folks. What about this one? What about the person who, like, when we need a little extra, like, hey, we got this need, and it's going to require us to. I don't know why I just got this. I know you're not as much of an office guy as I am, but the good old Michael Scott. When people got to come in on Saturday, like, hey, we got to work on Saturday morning, guys. So we're not talking about that necessarily. But when a little bit extra is needed, maybe it's an early morning, it's a late night, whatever it is, they're always busy. Like they always got something.
Yeah.
Like it's just not going to work out this time. And believe it or not, it didn't work out last time. It didn't work out the time before that.
I for some reason this one has me tickled because I can just run through my mind the examples and excuses over the years where you just can't seem to find that person.
Yeah.
That hey, where's and you start keeping track of it. And they always seem to not be around when a little bit more is needed.
Yeah. Well, I remember an example years ago with one of our old teams where, of course, I'm not going to name any names on the podcast. This was a long time ago. But this person had given some feedback saying that this person thought that we wanted to see us do more things as a team outside of the office.
Oh, yeah.
Great idea. You know what? You're right. And we're not great at that even here in 2024, but made the suggestion we should do more things out of the office. And so we did. And it was on a Saturday because we don't control when, certain events take place.
Yeah, we were doing a fun, like kind of a fun thing together and a fundraiser for an event we believed in, a cause we believed in.
And so we did this thing. and the person we're talking about, in fairness, showed up for the event only. But then when we were going to leave the event, when it was over and go have a team lunch and kind of hang out
that we had planned,
that was not new news, this person couldn't make it.
Yeah.
And I think it had something to do with it was on a Saturday.
Yeah. I think that was the feedback we got. And so, like, that's a huge culture killer. You want to do it on your terms.
Yeah.
And life and work does not happen just 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. And so it doesn't mean that we don't respect others and we don't have boundaries and we want people to have the balance, well-being, and performance. But one of the words you and I talk about a lot that I think we really look for in a team player is this sense of anticipation and sense of urgency, a willingness to do what it takes. And as leaders, you can't take advantage of that. You can abuse that. But man, the impact that kind of mindset has on a culture is like, I'm there. I got it. I'll do whatever, versus somebody who always seems to have some reason or some excuse of why they can't be there or why they can't do it or why they have to leave or why they didn't get it done.
Yeah, it just becomes exhausting for everybody. Because here's the thing, and I think people on the team end up feeling very disrespected because they've given up something too.
Yes.
And it's, that's how I would feel too. Like if I've given something up in order to take part in whatever the need is, and you're not willing to do that, it's hard not to feel like you think you're better than me or your time is more important than mine.
Yeah.
And that's just not going to work over the long haul for a team. And we don't pretend to think it's easy for a leader to manage and navigate complexities like that, but it's something that you got to pay attention to. So, Okay. I know we need to move toward kind of a wrap up here. And I think it's important to always say this too. We do not at all think this is like a fully exhaustive list of who can kill your culture. But having been around many different teams, different industries, different types of organizations for quite a while now, these are common tendencies, common things that we've seen pop up.
Yeah, and so as you said, it's not an exhaustive list, but I would encourage you. We always want you to spend some time with reflection to really think through what do you see, what's happening at your organization.
Yeah.
What are the primary reasons your culture is not what you want it to be? And what kind of behaviors or personalities are you allowing that continue to erode your culture? Maybe you haven't put the work in to start with to really build a culture. Maybe you don't have a clear vision or clear values. And so everybody's bringing a hodgepodge. There's no accountability to that. There's no structure. But maybe you've worked hard to build a culture, and now, for whatever reason, some of these behaviors we've allowed to take hold. What are some ideas? What are some things we can do to help, to stop
these things?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's two different types of, so I go to coaching immediately. And I think there's two very different types of approaches or coaching type moves that you can make. I think you can coach in a very kind of general big picture way that lacks deadlines, that lacks ramifications, that lacks accountability is really what we're saying. Or I think you can coach with all of those things involved of like, hey, we've got parameters, we have shared understanding, we've got a written contract, we've got signatures on a contract, we have a clear understanding of where this is going to go should it not improve. That's a different type of coaching approach. So I think if you have already worked on these types of things and they aren't getting better, it might mean that you need to coach with a different mentality, with a different type of urgency.
One thing I may be thinking about this wrong, Drew, but big picture coaching, as you said, without the deadlines, without the specifics, without the contract, to me, that's almost what you're doing in public as a group. So you as a leader, are you speaking that language? Are you talking that culture? Are you catching people doing something right in public? Are you rewarding the effort? Are you rewarding the person that says, I really appreciate your attitude. I really appreciate your mindset. I really appreciate you showing up early. I really appreciate you staying late. I really appreciate your confidence. I really appreciate your belief. Really appreciate your professionalism. Like, are you building the culture up that way where we're talking about all the time? And then the one-on-one coaching, like in private, really trying to gain some clarity around the reasons for this person's behavior and the reason they're taken away from the culture.
Yep.
They may not be aware of it.
That's true. They might not be.
Yeah. I mean, the research is not very good on our level of self-awareness. But then where I love what you said, let's get very specific. What's the accountability we're going to provide? How do you measure this? What are the deadlines that you want to see improvement? Because this is an opportunity, as harsh as it sounds, you either got to coach them up or coach them out.
Yeah, I mean, like think about the difference between these two scenarios if you're on the receiving end of this. If I say to you, hey, it would be great if, okay, compared to if I say to you, this can't go on.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, okay, that's a very, like, that feels entirely different. And my attitude and my responsiveness to those two statements could easily vary. For many people, if you say to them, hey, it would be great if, they're not really maybe even paying attention to what you're saying, unfortunately. And let's be optimistic and see the best in people and say that they are. They're still probably not going to be that motivated to make a change because of what you said and how you said it.
Yeah. Well, that kind of goes back to our podcast last week about kind of.
Bingo.
You kind of talk about it, you kind of didn't. And what you think you said is different than what they heard.
Right.
So being very specific with that language, very specific in terms if this, then that. The other piece I would encourage leaders, and this goes to the best teams I've been a part of that I've seen, is the players and the people have taken ownership of the culture. And so you have to have some internal leadership that sets a standard and holds people accountable. I think about some of the great teams we've had at Clemson. I think about you talking about Nakobe Dean at Georgia.
Yeah.
That like Kirby was getting to coach football because Nakobe Dean was taking the standard for here's the culture and here's how we think and here's how we act and here's how we show up. I mean, Cleveland Farrell and Christian Wilkins and Austin Bryant and Dexter, like they did that for us on our last big championship run. So as a leader, who do you have working for you that's helping to hold on to the culture, maintain the culture, hold people accountable to the culture?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And because you're going to hear from your leader about all kinds of things. You have to. It's kind of the way teams function. You're not always going to hear from your peers.
Yes.
And when you do, it's going to, at minimum, get your attention, I think, because you're not used to hearing. It's going to feel like a much less familiar voice. because it is a much less familiar voice. Okay. Well, very good. So I know we need to kind of wrap up. Again, like I think it's important to say it. We know that you do not have a team made up of perfect people. And our intention today is to highlight some specific, real concerns that we have seen on teams that even if they're not necessarily causing major problems today, don't take that as a sign and indicator that they can stick around and continue to be a part of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I hope this does as a leader is makes you aware of these behaviors and personalities and characteristics and traits, but also to empower you. Say you don't have to put up with this.
Right.
You aren't captive or held captive by the culture killers on your team. That you can do some things differently, and have the strength to do things differently to maintain the culture. And it's not easy.
Right.
And people and the energy it takes to manage some of these behaviors, and it's really easy to kind of get busy doing something else.
Right.
But the long-term vision for your company and your culture, it's imperative that you're constantly working on this.
So just as always, thank you for tuning in today. If you are enjoying our podcast and feel like it has been a helpful resource in your life, always click on over to Apple Podcast or Spotify and leave a review. Let us know how we're doing and how we can continue to grow and improve the Growth Project to serve you better. Until next time, over and out for now. Thank you.